Welcome back. We are joined today by Syed Mohammed Marandi, a professor at Tehran University and a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. So it's good to see you again, and I'm glad to hear Tehran is more quiet today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Glenn. It's always a pleasure being on your show. Yes, I'm at home and things are more quiet, but Israeli regime has been slaughtering Lebanese today, and they've been carpet bombing all sorts of different cities and in violation of the ceasefire agreement. Although Trump says it's not a part of the ceasefire, but the Pakistani Prime Minister has said very clearly, and he tweeted that Lebanon is part of the ceasefire. And since the regime is continuing its slaughter and they're just targeting ordinary people, the Iranians have fired missiles and they've shut down the Strait of Hormuz again. So it's unclear where things are going to go, whether we're going to have continued airstrikes against us by the Israeli regime or not. I think that probably will continue, and we'll have to see what the Americans do.
Yeah, I should have said we're recording this now today on the 8th of April, and you were just saying before we started recording that as we speak, Iranian missiles are now flying towards Israel in response to Israel's breach of the ceasefire agreement. But I guess a good place to start would be then, what are the actual terms? Because I find this to be quite extraordinary, that it's quite an important ceasefire. I mean, the whole world is, captured by this war against Iran, and we're getting, Wall Street Journal saying this, Reuters saying that. I mean, what are the actual terms, and why is it so difficult to get a very clear-cut answer to this?
Well, first, the United States said that Iran surrender. They said unconditional surrender, at least Trump did, like in the previous 12-day war. And then gradually that evolved into the 15-point plan, which Iran rejected. And then Iran began to develop its own plan, which the Supreme National Security Council gave to the leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, and he made some changes. They finalized the plan and sent it to Pakistan. And ultimately, Trump agreed that this would be the framework for negotiations. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to have peace. It doesn't mean that the United States will agree to these 10 points, even though they are very reasonable. But the United States being an empire and an extremely arrogant empire, it's very difficult to imagine them capitulating and accepting the rights of a nation. So my personal view is that either we're going to go back to war, but it would be difficult for the United States for a number of reasons. One is that there's a lot of internal pressure in the United States. That's why Trump accepted this in the first place, the Iranian framework. And there's a lot of international pressure on the United States. And remember, the Strait of Hormuz right now, as we speak, is closed. And in addition to that, I was in the war many years ago, so I can't say I'm an expert on military affairs. When I fought, it was the 1980s as a volunteer, but that was a long time ago. But U.S. equipment brought to the obviously. This have to remain in the region. The Persian Gulf gets very humid and hot, and that will have sandstorms in the Arabian Peninsula. And if I recall correctly, in the past wars against Iraq, subsequently the U.S. military had lots of damage, and they had to spend literally hundreds of billions of dollars to repair all the trucks and the planes and all that. And this time round, they're not even well protected because their bases have been destroyed and they were rushed into the region. And it was supposed to be a very short war where they would easily defeat Iran. And so I think it's going to be very difficult for the United States to maintain this force in the region without it becoming a a larger and more difficult burden as each day goes by. But still, the Iranians are preparing themselves for the worst. They're not going to, because we already negotiated with Americans twice. And we saw how both of those attempts to negotiate turned out. One, as we were negotiating, they launched a 12-day war, a blitzkrieg attack. And then last month, again, we were negotiating, making progress, and they launched another war. So it's not as if the Iranians are going to have any faith in the upcoming negotiations. And as I said, as we speak, the Israelis are doing whatever they can to prevent peace from spreading. These vicious attacks on Lebanon, just slaughtering women and children. Hundreds so far have been murdered in the last few hours. It's just unbelievable carnage. This is being done to prevent the ceasefire from working. And Trump, by changing his position, by saying that Lebanon is not a part of it, is showing both his own weakness and it is showing us that we should be prepared for renewed war, despite the difficulties that would have for the United States.
Yeah, so Joe Kent, he was, tweeting out a recording of himself where he was making the argument, if the U.S. wants this peace deal to work, then they have to find a way of restraining Israel. His argument was that Israel will do anything possible to disrupt this peace, so prevent. Again, that's not really delving into conspiracy theories, because if you follow the Israeli media today, they are, devastated almost. I saw also a video of people like Mark Levin, not in Israel, of course, but almost shaking out of frustration that this ceasefire could have been accepted. And so again,
I'm sure they're taking a lot of pleasure in the bombing of Lebanese cities and the massacre of women and children, because that's how they really are. And that's really what Netanyahu is doing. He's trying to destroy the ceasefire, but also he wants to kill people so that the Israeli people will give him some more leeway, give him more, because this is a genocidal society, as we've seen in the polls.
Yeah, no, I've been watching those videos out of Lebanon today as well. Apparently been just bombed nonstop the whole day, and also the videos are coming out of residential areas, so just men, women, and children slaughtered. And for all the people who are say that they're relieved that there's a ceasefire, it's very strange that there's not more of them speaking out against this, because this is, well, predictably, this is destroying the ceasefire.
I think if things go very well, the 2 weeks will be extended, and maybe they'll agree on some minor issues or some easier issues to deal with. But I don't believe that we're going to have an agreement with the United States over the 10 points that Iran has put in the plan, because that's not how the United States works. It is an empire, and it's an arrogant empire, and Trump is the most arrogant of the arrogant emperors of empire. And in addition to that, he's all over the place. He'll say something today and something else tomorrow. He'll say something this morning, something else this afternoon. He'll say something in one sentence and say the opposite in another. So I do not envy those who are going to be negotiating with the United States directly or indirectly, or passing messages back and forth. But what I think is right now the big question is whether we're going to have renewed fighting between Iran and the United States in the coming weeks. Again, I think I'm sure that the Iranians are preparing themselves as we speak for further bloodshed and further attacks. But I think that it will be, as I said earlier, difficult for Trump to restart this war, because it's already very unpopular. It has gone nowhere. And there's absolutely no sign that Iran has grown any weaker. For 40 days, the Iranians have been firing missiles day and night at the Israeli regime, at the U.S., missiles and drones, at U.S. Assets in the Persian Gulf and as at proxies that are complicit in the war. There's no end to the capabilities of Iran for the months to come. My understanding is that Iran has far more missiles and drones than anyone can imagine. We've discussed this before. Iran has been preparing itself for this war for 25 years. And Iran is very confident about its capabilities and the failure in that operation that was to steal Iran's uranium. I think that also contributes to the pressure on Trump. So I think for a host of reasons, it's going to be difficult for him to restart it. But I think that, again, Iran is not going to take any chances. It's going to prepare itself.
Well, is it possible that the war takes on a different form if the U.S. wants to exit from the war and essentially hand it over to the Gulf states or hand it over to Israel? Is it possible that it will only transition to only a Iranian Israeli war? That is, they say, well, Lebanon's not part of the ceasefire. Iran says, well, then Israel's not part of the ceasefire, and it just takes on different format. Because I also saw a report right before we logged on that a Mirage fighter from the United Arab Emirates was apparently attacking an Iranian target, that is the petrochemical facilities on this, I guess, Lavan Island. And so again, it's I saw some statements coming out of the UAE as well that they wanted the reparations from Iran. So I'm not sure why they want to keep this war going. I mean, they're very vulnerable, especially if the US doesn't want to have a leading role anymore. But is it possible that this becomes the US excuse itself and hand over to the Gulf states and the Israelis?
Well, the Persian Gulf regimes are not in a position to fight Iran. And if they do, again, as I said earlier, we're heading towards warm weather. Here, you've been to Tehran. We have mountains full of snow right now. We have no, if we have no electricity, let's say, it'll get very hot in the summer, and it'll be difficult for us to sleep at night in the heat if we don't have our cooler, the AC on. But in the Emirates, if they don't have electricity, if they don't have their critical infrastructure, everyone will have to leave. The same is true with Kuwait and Qatar. And all the assets of these regimes are right alongside the coast. They're deserts. In fact, it's Yemen and Iran and Iraq and Lebanon have forests. They have, 4 seasons. But these countries are deserts. All they have is oil and gas. And they're totally dependent on this for their economy. And all of their installations are right in front of Iran. They're not deep inside. These countries are small, except for the Saudis. So if they want to get into conflict with Iran, I think that would be the end of these regimes. It would end very swiftly. So the Emirates should, remember, that they are not important and know their place. And the Iranians will control the Strait of Hormuz. So if the Emirates wants to fight, then Iran will hit it, and it will not allow it to use the Strait of Hormuz, and probably the ruling family will be gone within a few days. And the same is true with the others. So I don't see them to being in any position to confront Iran. Regarding the Israeli regime, that is quite possible. As Iran strikes because of the violations and the slaughter of women and children in Lebanon, the Israeli regime may retaliate. And then since the Israeli regime uses the Americans help them refuel Israeli jets, then we'll have to see, what role the United States will want to play in all this. So that could lead again to Iran-U.S. confrontation. But we've had Iran and the Israeli regime strike at each other before. That was the 12-day war. And we've been seeing that in the past 40 days. The Iranians are more than prepared to continue do this, to strike them at time and time again until they stop. But then the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed.
Let's just move one step further. That is into the actual deal that's being made, because what shocked, I guess, much of the American media was that Trump accepted that the Strait of Hormuz would be controlled by Iran, or more specifically, it's supposed to be both the Iranians and Oman is supposed to be able to co-manage it, or both at least be able to get some fees for using the strait. Is this an effort to set up kind of a collective, I guess, security arrangement or economic arrangement, as opposed to only having Iran do it, or was this part of a compromise? Because I can see why Iran can claim it. That is, if it wants reparation for what was done against it. But Oman, is it more just about the geography, or is it about the collective security, or how do you make sense of this?
Well, first of all, Oman has had a much more reasonable relationship with Iran. And during the last 40 days, I'm sure you've seen, and your viewers have noticed, that Iran has left Oman untouched, even though they too have American bases. But Iran has, because Oman has behaved better than the others, it's treated it differently. And Oman, of course, is the country that owns the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. And it would be easier for Iran if Oman was cooperating with it with regards to the status and the management of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, what exactly would the relationship be? And what would Oman get out of this? What would Iran get out of this? That, I think, is something that will have to come out of negotiations. But those negotiations have been taking place already. And the Iranian parliament is preparing a law with regards to the management of the Strait of Hormuz. But the interesting thing is, we would have never moved in this direction if the United States had not launched this war. We had no plans to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. But the United States basically pushed us in that direction. And I must say, Glenn, that by controlling the Strait of Hormuz, Iran becomes a much more powerful country than it was before, but also by really winning the war. And I'm not saying the war is over. But by winning the war, the Iranians, I think, have turned into a much more powerful country. This is something that I think we discussed earlier, a couple of weeks ago, maybe. Iran is much more powerful today. And in my opinion, the United States is a much weaker entity than what it was before. And I think countries across the global south will see this as a major sign of U.S. weakness. Countries that almost universally, except for China, whenever the United States bullied them about trade and tariffs, now perhaps they will become a bit more assertive in defending their rights. The Indians, the Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis, across the world, across the global majority, they've been bullied, and now Iran has basically told the Americans no, and the Americans did the worst crimes against the country along with their allies, and they failed. So I think that Iran becomes much more powerful. The United States becomes, relatively speaking, much weaker. And the Israeli regime loses because it did not succeed in this war, and its main supporter has lost a lot of credibility and authority, and that is bad for the regime itself. But also the big losers are these 5 family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and now they are hungry and have no cake.
Yeah, I interviewed yesterday a common friend of ours, Alistair Crook, who was making the same point that Iran's seeming victory in this war is quite transformative to the entire international system. That is not just a military victory over the former global hegemon, but also the economic aspect of it. That is, you can argue only controlling the Strait of Hormuz, only the fees would, some say would amount to somewhere up to 100 billion a year. I'm not sure. I haven't, checked the numbers, but anyways, it's quite a significant just the money, but it's not just this. It's also, as you said, the ability to stand up to the United States. This trade can then be organized in other currencies, which then puts the petrodollar under stress. It would also essentially elevate the cost of being an American frontline state, vassal, ally, whatever one wants to call it. And this, again, would have ramifications even beyond the Middle Eastern region. That is Europe, East Asia. So this is going to have a huge impact. But it's quite extraordinary what has happened, and how foolish it was for Trump to actually get into this war. I mean, when he saw all the former presidents who had a great pressure to attack Iran but never did, the idea that this was just because they weren't as strong as him, not as decisive, as opposed to not being as foolish. I mean, it is just, it's quite amazing. But it's been some reports that it was China that also called Iran and asked them to accept a ceasefire deal to get an end to the war. Do you have any information on this, or?
I doubt that such a thing is true, because what was important for Iran was for Trump to give up his 15-point plan and to recognize Iran's 10-point plan. And that, again, Iran is under no illusion that Trump is going to come to the negotiating table and say, okay, I accept, and everything is finished, and let's move on. But that, I think, was important. It was a very symbolic moment, I think, for the entire world. I think it symbolizes a major shift in global affairs. Perhaps, and again, we could have war, but perhaps in a way, one of, if not the most significant, one of the most significant moments since the Second World War. I personally think it may be the most significant the last 40 days. But for Trump to make that transition, to accept that is a humiliation. There's no way, there's no other way to look at it. And that was important for Iran. But at the same time, Iran is, again, under no illusions. It's continued right now. It briefly opened the Strait of Hormuz and closed it again because of what the Israeli regime did. It's firing missiles at the Israeli regime, and it's also fired missiles and drones at these Arab regimes after that strike was carried out against Iran. So Iran is going to prepare itself in case Trump wants to go back to war, or feels that he has to go back to war. But I should also, by the way, point out that the Strait of Hormuz Iran is going to be treating friendly countries in a different way than countries that have cooperated with Americans in this aggression. So I think Chinese ships and Russian ships and Iraqi ships will be treated differently than Saudi ships or British ships or American ships or Canadian ships or Australian ships.
Well, just a last question. Given that this war has already spread, and it's not merely a war only between the United States and Israel, and Iran, as obvious with Israel attacking Lebanon, but also you mentioned previously that some borders could be changed in this war. For example, Iraq might seize Kuwait. Well, I mean, it's not as if Iran, is this puppet master who controls everything in the region. It has regional partners and allies, but they have some autonomy and in their own interest. I mean, it's how much can be expected can we expect everything to die down as a result of this? I know this is the driving force, but do you see other parts of this conflict continuing? For example, Kuwait ending up as Iraqi territory?
Well, the strength of Iran, part of it lies in the fact that it has these alliances. There's no doubt about that. Iraq has played an enormous role in this war, and it has, to a degree, liberated itself of American occupation. Not fully, but it has It's achieved major results. Yemen too, and of course Hezbollah taking this opportunity to hit back at the Israeli regime so that it can take back its countries, the occupied territory, and have a real ceasefire, because the Israeli regime has been killing Lebanese civilians every day since the so-called ceasefire, just like they do in Gaza. So this is a collective strength. But the future depends on these Arab family regimes. If these regimes did not allow the United States to use their airspace and their territory and their sea and their shoreline, we would not have had this war. Americans could not carry out a war under those circumstances. It would have been much more difficult, and I don't think that they would have launched the war in the first place. If these regimes rethink their foreign policy and behave normally like normal countries, instead of conspiring and bringing in foreign powers to create a platform for them to invade other countries, if they discontinue that policy, they will be safe. It will never be like what it was before. Those Epstein-class billionaires are not ever going to come back to the Emirates and Qatar and all those corruption there that I can't explain here. But they're very well known for. That's not going to come back, fortunately, for them, for their own people. But they can live normally. But if they choose a different path, I don't think their countries will exist in future, and then the borders will change.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, even if the ceasefire would hold, a permanent peace deal would come through after this, the damage that has already been done. I mean, people focus on the global economy with the energy, the fertilizers, all of this. But for the Gulf states, it's going to be very hard for Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, especially, to recover from this, it seems. But no, it is. I feel like we're going to be dealing, even if a peace is reached, the repercussions of this is something we will have to deal with for many years to come. So, yeah, interesting is one word to say, but yeah, it's quite disruptive, and I keep going back to the point. It's quite amazing, given how predictable a lot of this should have been, that they still chose this war. But yeah, let's hope the ceasefire holds. But I share your pessimism, so thank you very much. Well, I know you're quite busy there in Tehran, so as always, thank you very much for taking time.
Thank you, Glenn. It's always a great honor being on your show.
播报新闻是我的日常，必须时刻保持妆容和皮肤的最佳状态。当来到人生中最重要的时刻，也是 KS 逆时奇迹帮助我轻松驾驭，闪闪发光。KS 逆时奇迹活肤露全效精华、精华霜，多达5种 EGF 6大冻龄关键成分，保湿效果让我非常满意，小细纹也不再困扰我。我就是我自己的最佳女主角 ，KS 让我从容自信，光彩动人。我是我人生中的大女主，我的最爱我做主。KS 逆时奇迹系列热卖中，下单请上快点购，透过中天新闻网 App 下单立减50，或输入 CTI 推荐码有额外折扣。